Hi guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. And today we have a family portrait. This is a smaller family portrait. It's not going to be as large as some of the previous videos that you've seen where it takes an hour. This should not be an hour video. However, you guys know whenever I get going that sometimes it will turn into an hour video. So let's just see where this takes us. It is going to be on the house of Jacques Bogart, which is it's a quality house for cheap, in my opinion. Most people would just look at the pricing and think that it's a cheap fragrance house. In my opinion, that could not be farther from the truth. These are quality fragrances that they sell for cheap, for whatever reason, very cheap. And some of these are discontinued and a little bit harder to find. Some of them are still readily available. Obviously, when you're talking about $15, $20 mark, they are going to be a little bit synthetic. So you know they own a couple other houses under the umbrella. They own the House of Carvin, which I have no fragrances from. They own the House of Chevignon, which I own one fragrance from. And they own the House of Lapidus, which I have two fragrances on. So we're just going to go through this real quick. And I'm going to show you guys some fragrances. Since they are a cheaper house, a lot of people buy them as alternatives to more expensive fragrances. I pulled aside a couple of the more expensive fragrances that some of the offerings remind me of. Not all of them are exact. Sometimes something doesn't remind you of everything. But, I'm not someone that always likes to say, hey, this reminds me of this, this reminds me of this. But I do at least want to give you an idea, if you're buying a Jacques Bogart fragrance, maybe what it is inspired by. So, before we get started, though, let's do scent of the day. My scent of the day today is an Annick Monardo classic from the year 2000, and it is Body Koros. The notes in this are bonkers, as Duck would say, because they encompass a couple notes that when I told them to Yura today, he actually said it seems like, mint and ice cream, they don't go together. But there's eucalyptus, incense, cedar, clary sage, and benzoin. Now, those notes don't seem like they should go together. I've got about a 10-minute dry down here, and they are absolutely beautiful. Annick Monardo is just a master of coming up with a fragrance like this that it is a little bit synthetic, but that eucalyptus note I have not seen in any other fragrance except for Creed's Royal Mayfair, which I absolutely love. But if you'll see, I have an older style bottle where the cap actually does come off to reveal a sprayer, not the built-in sprayer. The built-in sprayer that looks like a Koros bottle is the newer formulation. So I have the older formulation with this strange little stand here, but it is still readily available. It has the warmth of benzoin. It's so good. So good for just a more modern perfumery. This is what modern designers should be putting out. Probably one of the last really good designer releases from the House of YSL. That is Body Koros. That's my scent of the day. Okay, on to the conglomerate of Jacques Bogart. Now, the first fragrance is the Chevignon. Let's get that out of the way. This is a fragrance that came out in 2013, and it's called Heritage. Chevignon Heritage for men. And this is an interesting fragrance because it's not easy to get for some reason, but you guys know I love the note of iris. And this mixes iris with this sort of generic woodsy smell in the base, maybe cedar, maybe Gaiac wood. I have no idea. I can't really tell, to be honest with you. This is a cheapie. But it also mixes in this strange ozonic note in the top with the iris and the citruses that you would not think work very well. But for a summer fragrance, it has enough depth to be interesting. And if you just want to throw something on and not think about it, this is a good fragrance. And that's kind of the theme with this house is the fragrances are cheap in price, but they're not cheap in quality. This does not smell cheap to me. If you put this under my nose blind and I had no idea what I was smelling, this could easily come from YSL or Dior nowadays, and they could easily charge $100 for this. So don't go off of price in perfumery. Creed's a great example of that. You know, just because they sell their fragrances for $500 does not necessarily mean they are the best fragrances. I have fallen into that trap before. Not saying that Creeds are bad, but I'm just saying higher price in perfumery or lower price in perfumery does not instantly mean better or worse. Okay, the next fragrance is the initial offering from the house of Jacques Bogart. It came out in 1975, and this easily could have been on my leather list. But again, can't include everything. That was an hour-long video, by the way, and I still left off a lot of leathers. But this is Bogart Signature, and you can see the line under the name as if it was signed by a pen. That's why it's called Signature. It's really just called Bogart by Jacques Bogart, but everyone calls it Bogart Signature. It's one of the few Jacques Bogart you'll notice that don't have a built-in atomizer. It has this little, very 1975 presentation, which I actually like. There's nothing flashy or fancy about it, but this fragrance is very reminiscent of the time. It was built by Maurice Morin and Lucien Ferrero, and it's rosemary, and it's nutmeg, geranium, cloves, and it's heavy oak moss, and heavy birch, and heavy leather. And I love wearing this fragrance. And this is a super cheapie. You can get this for $12 or $10 or $8, or it's unbelievable. And this actually reminds me of a fragrance that my father used to wear. It was his signature scent. So it has a lot of meaning to me, which is Paco Rabanne Purom. Now this is a vintage bottle. This is a vintage splash. You can tell it's a vintage by the fact that the R is raised. If you can find one of these older bottles where the R is raised, the animalic honey really pops more. But I'm showing you this because these two are right next to each other. So if you like fragrances like this and you've never smelled Jacques Bogart Signature, this is one that I think would really appeal to you. Honestly, I get the exact same amount of joy wearing either of these fragrances. They are almost interchangeable to me, just because this was $12 and this was, I paid $70 for because it's a vintage and I had to pay up a bit for it, or whatever it was, doesn't mean that this is the better fragrance. I love the honey in this fragrance, but I love some of the things this fragrance offers that you don't find in Paco Rabanne Purom. So I just say that because I wanted to show you the comparison, the cheaper Jacques Bogart. This is I would say if you like vintage fragrances, this is a must own. And even though it's cheap, it's so good. I love wearing this fragrance. It's a fantastic offering from the house, and really this release put them on the map. Okay, next we're gonna skip a bit. We'll go back and forth in time through this video. Next, we're going to skip a bit to what's called Bogart Purom. And Bogart Purom is a fragrance that looks like this. It's also a little bit of a cheapie, you could say. This is more of a modern presentation for the house of Jacques Bogart. You've got the built-in sprayer, which I actually really like. You've got this, tower look here with the silver, and then the Bogart B right there. And this is a 2004 release. It was issued, the perfumers were Maurice Roussel and Norbert Bijou, which I'm not familiar with his work. But this is basically a pretty simple fragrance. Lavender bergamot in the top, orange blossom rose and lily of the valley in the mid, tonka, patchouli, cedar, oak moss, and musk in the base. Now, if I told you those notes, you probably would have an idea of how this smells. This reminds me very much of Jacques Bogart's take on Pure Havane. It's not exactly Pure Havane, okay? So if you want Pure Havane, you have to go buy Pure Havane. But I will say, if you like that DNA, that sweet DNA, there is absolutely zero sweetness in this. This is dry as a bone. This has that modern masculine sweetness to it, but it's done very, very well. I really enjoy wearing this as well, even though it's sweet and I normally do not like sweet fragrances. Bogart Purom is done very well, and you get 100 ml for $20 or whatever it is. Just a fantastic offering. And again, for the value for money on a house like this is very high. So that's Jacques Bogart Purom. Okay, next we're going to jump to the House of Ted Lapidus. It's all under the same umbrella corporation. And this is a discontinued fragrance. It came out in 1999, and it's called Ted by Ted Lapidus. And you can see the TL presentation there. And this is an interesting fragrance because it's a citrus fragrance. It's definitely a summer type fragrance to me. Some people I read on Fragrantica call this, you know, a winter. I wouldn't wear this in the winter. This is more of a summer type fragrance, but there's this warmth added underneath it. It reminds me a little bit of a fragrance like Tiffany's for Men, how it has that citrus note, but it also has some warmth underneath it, and it also reminds me a little bit of Rocoboroco. If you like Rocoboroco, again, this used to be a cheaper alternative. I think it came out in a very similar time frame to when Rocoboroco was popular, but it's citruses with this amber warmth underneath, which is very appealing, very attractive. There's a vanilla note. For just a citrus summer fragrance, I really like this. And it's getting a little harder to find, though. Don't pay silly money. Don't pay silly money for this. When you're in the vintage game, you have to kind of know. You have to kind of know what to go for and what not to go for. And if you find a good deal on this, grab it. But don't pay, you know, just because it's discontinued. This is not one to go break the bank on, but Ted by Ted Lapidus. Not my favorite offering from the house. That's coming up later, but a very solid release. And then we're going to do a fragrance that came out relatively recently. It came out in 2010, so it's now 10, 11 years old. And it's called Riviera Nights by the House of Jacques Bogart. Now, this smells very similar if you like the cardamom in La Nuit de l'Homme, for example. This is one to definitely get your nose on. I bought this because of the review that Thomas from Early Greek did, and he is hardly ever wrong. The cardamom note in this is just as good, if not better, than current batches of La Nuit de l'Homme. Maybe the older stuff might be a little bit better. I don't know. I've never compared the two, but for $20, 100 ml, or whatever it is, I think maybe I paid a little bit more to ship it over from Europe because I could not find this anywhere here. This just goes straight to discounters, you know. I don't even think I've ever seen this in a store. It is here, I'll run through the notes with you. It's narrowly grapefruit and bergamot in the top. The mid is dried fruits, cardamom, and nutmeg. Beautiful mid on this fragrance. And the base is vetiver, tonka, and Virginia cedar. So for like a work fragrance, if you want something that is attractive, appealing, different, but also professional, that vetiver adds this, you know, seriousness. Vetiver is a very serious note to me for some reason. Riviera Nights, again, getting harder to find. These are, I don't know if it's discontinued or, you know, if it's just supply availability is hard to find, but if you find this for a cheap price, scoop it up. Next is one of the fragrances that was in my top fragrances that I own, that I hate list, and it is Jacques Bogart Silver Scent Pure. And I don't like the syntheticness of this fragrance. This is really the only bottle I've ever bought that was a real letdown. And mostly because, you know, this was $20 and I think I got this at discounters for 40 bucks. This is Dunhill Icon. This is Dunhill's Icon, which does the same type of fragrance that Silver Scent Pure is trying to do, but so much better. This is, this is a fantastic fragrance. And maybe the price at retail makes someone think maybe it's worth going for something like this when this is selling for 120, 140 bucks retail. But with discounters where you can get these at the discounters, this is 100 ml and I paid 45 bucks or something for it. The difference just doesn't match anymore. This really closes the gap to me. So I'd wear this all day before I ever reached for this. But it is out there. If you like this DNA, maybe you could check it out. But to me, it's very synthetic on the nose. Neroli is actually a very expensive note. And it's hard to do a orange blossom Neroli note well, cheap. It takes money to build that kind of accord well. There is an apple, this granny apple note in here. Maybe it's the apple I don't like, but whatever it is, it doesn't do it for me. This is a pass for me. Okay, next we are going to move on to one of the most famous fragrances from the house of Jacques Bogart. And it came out in 1980, and it's called One Man Show. And you can see now you're starting to see kind of what the Jacques Bogart presentation really looks like. Let me shut this so you can see this a little bit better. You can really see what the Jacques Bogart presentation looks like. The built-in sprayer, just very simple, but a nice presentation for such a cheaply priced house. And this is a green Chypre fragrance, basically. It was created by Roger Pellegrino, and it has a lot of notes in it. This is a complex fragrance. It's got basil, bergamot, caraway, artemisia, galbanum in the top. There's a very heavy pine note. And sometimes I struggle a little bit with the greenness of this fragrance because it's so green. And then in the base, you've got the oak moss, the leather, the castoreum. There's even a coconut note, which Rich Mitch was laughing a little bit about on one of his channel today. He did a video and mentioned that there's sometimes a random coconut note thrown into 80s fragrances, and this one has it. And I can guarantee you there's not a drop of coconut in here. You'll never get a coconut note. If you do, you're only smelling it because they're telling you it's there and you think you're smelling it. Otherwise, no one would ever say there's coconut in this. And the fragrance that it's most compared to, that's more expensive and also now discontinued, is called Crizia Uomo. And I like the House of Crizia. I actually have a fragrance coming from them, a women's fragrance from 1985, coming soon, that I ordered, discontinued. This is also discontinued, by the way. I think all of their masculine fragrances might be discontinued, but these two are two peas in a pod. I basically get the same enjoyment wearing this as I get wearing the more expensive designer. And so this is one where, they really did match the quality, just like I was saying with Bogart Signature. I get the same joy as wearing, let's say, Paco Rabanne Purom. This is one where I could reach for either of these. It wouldn't matter. I probably, if I had the choice, would save the $100 or whatever I paid for this, 120, and just keep this instead because it's so much, cheaper and more affordable. This is a modern formula, by the way. You don't have to worry about vintage with the House of Jacques Bogart. That is one thing that I like about the house is, for the most part, it doesn't matter. You don't have to hunt down a vintage formula because, they have been able to keep the formula very true to the classic, even with, modern reformulations. And funnily enough, these fragrances usually come with some sort of a, like aftershave, like a 3 ml aftershave little pack. And every single one I've got, there's nothing in there. They're completely dry. So I have no clue if it's just because they sit on the shelves for a bit or what, but there's never any aftershave in any of them. But that is One Man Show, and the House of Uomo is the closest designer comparison. If you like green fragrances, these are one to check out. And then I actually like the flanker of One Man Show even better. And they have a couple other flankers I've never gotten my nose on. But the one that I like the most is called One Man Show Oud Edition. And I said in one of my previous videos that this can be a potential cheapy replacement for this leather oud. And I stand by that. This is obviously more nuanced. It's cleaner. It's better built. It's probably built with much better materials. But this is $300 and this is $20 or $15 if you look around for 100 ml. And, you know, it is more synthetic, obviously. But what's hilarious about this fragrance, Thomas, again from Early Greek, just hit the nail on the head with this one. He said that the house of Jacques Bogart said, "Oh, you guys want an oud accord, huh? Well, here you go." And they just give it to you. No screwing around, no foreplay, just bam, the same synthetic oud, the same pile, you know, of synthetic oud that every single house is using, even Tom Ford and all those others that are selling their ouds for $300. It's probably exactly the same synthetic molecules here. This came out in 2014, by the way. And this is galbanum, red thyme, and bergamot in the top, oud, spices, geranium in the mid, papyrus, patchouli, and leather in the base. And it is a beast too. This is just as much of a beast as this. So performance matches smell, very, very close. More synthetic, obviously. When you spray this on, maybe give it 30 seconds or a minute or two before you start sniffing your wrist and making a judgment call. But if you can't get this because it's expensive or limited, or rumor is it might even be discontinued or whatever it is, and I love this fragrance. And I even have the reformulated one. I wish I had the older bottle where the C and the D are not connected on the cap. I would love to smell a vintage, but even the modern formula with that strange sand note in the base is quite good. This is one to definitely check out. Okay, next we are going to go to the House of Ted Lapidus. And my favorite Ted Lapidus fragrance is Lapidus Purom. Now, this is a modern formula. I also have two vintage 150 ml bottles, and the vintage is I know they're vintage because the ingredients list only says like water, perfume, and alcohol, and that's it. Those shorter ingredients lists are what you really look for. These are also splash bottles. Apparently they used to make an older formula where this was metal. So I know this is a vintage, but it's not such an old vintage from the original release date, which was 1987. Fantastic year in perfumery, by the way. So I know it's vintage, but not that vintage. Oh, this is so good. This is so good. What I love about this fragrance so much, this is a very complex fragrance. If you look at the note tree, it's rich. It does have a pineapple note in the top. The original pineapple, not Aventus, Lapidus Purom. And then there's lavender. There's this green artemisia and juniper that keeps everything fresh, but then it hits you with this animalic honey, which I love the note of honey. I said leather's my favorite note. Honey is very, very close. It's right up there with leather. I love that animalic honey. And there's a honey note in this, by the way, if I didn't mention it. These older bottles of Paco Rabanne Purom, there's this animalic honey that's amped up. It's gorgeous. You don't get it in the modern bottles. And this has it done to absolute perfection. It has incense, it has pine, it has orris, which I love, gives it some powderiness. And then in the base, there's this tobacco and patchouli. And of course, the vintage, the oak moss is turned up. Just an all-time great masculine. Some people say, oh, it's hard to wear today. It's not. I absolutely love wearing this just as much as I love wearing stuff like this. If you like your old school fragrances, this is one that you must have in your collection. And in fact, the modern formulation is quite good. I don't know how to tell batch codes. I didn't pay a lot of money for this. I got it on Fragrance X or Net or, something like that. And it was cheap. But you can kind of see the two bottles next to each other. This one looks a little bit more plasticky. This one looks a little bit more old school. There's a little bit of marbling there on the glass, but very nice presentation either way. I love this fragrance. This would be right up there with my all-time favorite fragrances with Kouros. It does have a little bit of stink to it. You have to enjoy, those kind of fragrances. This is what this Polo Green, Kouros, Antaeus, Hugo Boss #1, Paco Rabanne Purom, those kind of old school fragrances. If you like those vintage masculines, try to hunt down Lapidus Purom. And then a fragrance called Witness by Jacques Bogart. And I actually have two bottles here. This is the backup bottle with the built-in sprayer, which I really like that. Design from the House of Jacques Bogart. And then the one that I originally had is a smaller 30 ml that had the cap came off. And this is what I've been drawing from. And then I got the backup from Manouche because I love this fragrance, actually. It is, compared to a couple other fragrances I could have showed you, but I didn't want to bother pulling them out. One is Aubusson Homme. And then the other is a fragrance from Antonio Puig called Sybaris, Sybaris, also discontinued. I like this more than Sybaris. I actually bought a bottle of Sybaris off of Enchante Perfumes, off of Manouche, and the cinnamon was really amped up in it, heavily, so much so it kind of put me off a little bit. This is, believe it or not, the cheapie, which, again, it used to be a cheapie. Now that it's discontinued, the prices are starting to rise. I like the way that this is done more. The third comparison, if you pull it up on Fragrantica, is Balenciaga Purom. And I can see the similarities. They're not the same, obviously. Don't buy this and expect Balenciaga Purom. But I am a little surprised that Rich Mitch doesn't like this and he loves Balenciaga Purom, because they do share some similarities. They are not the same, but they're from the same genre, if you will. And this also has a note of honey. It's not as animalic. And this is also a very complex fragrance. These 80s, I believe this was an 80s baby. This was issued in 92, I'm sorry, early 90s, still late 80s, early 90s. I love that time frame. Dominique Preissas, I believe is his last name, made this, and it's basically a top of coriander, which I love that spice, artemisia, aldehydes, basil, lavender, orange, bergamot, lemon in the top, cinnamon, balsam fir, carnation, honey, geranium, jasmine, rose in the mid. You do get a little bit of that floral feel, but it is so masculine. It's like, just because there's the floral touches in YSL Jazz or Guerlain Heritage, those are pure masculine fragrances to me. And then there's this incense and oak moss and patchouli. Maybe it's the patchouli in this that reminds me of the patchouli in Balenciaga Purom. But then there's benzoin, there's sandalwood, amber, styrax, cedar, musk, vanilla. There's a lot going on in these cheap fragrances. And, just for something, maybe you want to wear it around the house. You don't want to keep wearing the same normal stuff every day. If you get a bottle of this, and a little goes a long way. Projection, and I should mention, by the way, with the entire house of Jacques Bogart and Ted Lapidus, and even that Chevignon, You don't need a lot. They are performers. If performance matters to you, this is definitely a house to look into, because a lot of these are beast mode performances, and this one is no exception to the rule. So Witness, very glad to have a backup. I only back up some of my favorite fragrances, so, and one of the few fragrances Duck and I disagree on, by the way. So I would love to hear you guys' thoughts. If maybe my nose is a little broken on this and you guys think I'm crazy for liking it, or if anyone else likes this fragrance. Witness by the House of Jacques Bogart. And I saved the best for last, which if you watch my videos, you know I will tend to do. This is one of my favorite Jacques Bogart fragrances, because it is so powerful and brave. And, you know, to release a fragrance like this, even though it was the 80s, it was created by one of my favorite perfumers. I gave him a shout out yesterday in my leather fragrance video. His name is Ron Winograd. He only has 3 or 4 masculines that I love, but the ones he did, I love. And this is a fragrance called Furyo. Furyo, and as you can see, the circle has a little bit after the end. It looks like a motorcycle going forward. The advertisements were like, you know, a woman and a man on a motorcycle, futuristic, 80s looking. This fragrance is comparable to the King Kouros. If you like this, this is definitely one to hunt down. I love this fragrance. And it's one of the reasons why, even though I don't have a Charles of the Ritz bottle of Kouros, I'm not ever super worried about running out, because, and I hate to say this, and it's going to sound crazy, because if you spray this and compare them, there is no comparison. This is the better fragrance, hands down, bar none. This is more synthetic in the top. Actually, the top, when you smell this for the first 30 seconds, you're going to recoil. Guaranteed. 100% you will recoil. You're going to go, oh my God, what is that? It is just this synthetic civet castoreum bomb. I mean, just curled up in a ball and thrown at you. And, you know, at first it's going to go, how can anyone wear this? But give it time to settle, and you get this beautiful musk and tobacco. There's a fig leaf note in here, which honestly, how do you pick out a fig leaf or a juniper or a bay laurel note when it just smells like, you know, like Jacques Bogart did Furyo, which is exactly what they did. You know, this came out in 1981. This came out in 1988. So obviously this had been having success for a long time. And then, you know, the House of Jacques Bogart put their impression of, oh God, even through the atomizer. I need to wear this soon. It is a monster. And you talk about performance. It is a little expensive now because it's so rare, but I almost want to back this up. I would love to back this bottle up with another one just so I can wear it and not worry about running out. It is a rougher tumbler Kouros. Oh, you know what? There's one other fragrance that I should have grabbed. I'll show it to you guys some other time. That's very close to this too. Also discontinued. It's called Joint by Rocoboroco. That's right, Rocoboroco. It's called Joint. And it comes in a bottle that has a very similar color to this. And if you can find that, that's getting harder to find as well. That came out in '93, even after this. But they took the exact same color design. And I think Rocoboroco is a Italian house. And they released a fragrance that is very similar and worth getting your hands on, but with some differences. But anyways, so that is the final fragrance in the Jacques Bogart Chevignon Ted Lapidus Carvin, which I don't have any of, family portrait. If you want me to do a comparison of the vintage Ted Lapidus versus the modern formulation, let me know. I'll be glad to do that. But other than that, we're going to keep this video short and sweet for me anyways. 34 minutes. Thank you very much for watching, commenting, and we will see you guys on the next video. Cheers.